thank you, James. So I'm responsible for dynamic spectrum access, the TV white space manager in Ofcom, and also the project director looking at our work to transition our shared access licenses to a database managed automatic assignment process. Spectrum sharing and looking at different ways to share and make spectrum available is an important part of our work in Ofcom. And I'd say that we already share spectrum to our normal spectrum management processes. So normal licensing where we separate users in frequency, geography, or time. So really sharing isn't new in this respect. But as innovation stimulates greater demand for spectrum, it's increasingly important to look at how we can make sharing easier and how we can make it more efficient so that the greatest range of use cases can access spectrum, while at the same time protecting existing users and the benefits people enjoy from those services already in place. We recently published a spectrum strategy consultation in December last year, and we highlighted some key points, excuse me, in that to look at to encourage more sharing. So we had having better data, more sophisticated analysis when assessing the conditions for sharing. And I think Heike might have touched on some of these in his presentation. Wireless systems to be more resilient to interference from their neighbours, and an efficient balance between the level of interference protection given to one service and the flexibility to others to transmit. So really we're talking about coexistence studies and the amount of protection given to incumbents or the protection that they ask for. In the UK, we have a relatively flexible authorization regime which allows us to license different users in the same band. So no licensee has exclusive access to spectrum. Even awarded licenses, we still have the ability to license underneath those if appropriate. We have a range of spectrum sharing approaches that we employ when we license or when we introduce other services or when we look to share spectrum. So we have the existing coordinated access, so our normal licensing process, and you can have different users operating in the same band. Business radio, you might know as public mobile radio, on a shared license, we can have 3 users sharing a channel in the same location. We have dynamic spectrum access in TV white space, which is managed by a database. And this was really useful during the 700 megahertz clearance, where we were able to change what spectrum was available and what spectrum was available while we were retuning the DTT transmitters as we went through clearance. We've also looked at introducing new spectrum sharing opportunities, like we did a couple of years ago, where we allowed PMSC wireless microphones to share in the 960 to 1164 megahertz band alongside aeronautical and military systems. We have local access licensing, and I think this has been touched on by some of the other presenters, where we allow users to access spectrum licensed to mobile operators in areas where the mobile operator is not using it. And we have shared access licensing in a number of bands. So, and one of those bands is 38 to 42, which has been mentioned, I think, by Eric and others for verticals, where there is sharing with existing fixed wireless access and satellite services. The shared access is licensed on a first come first served basis, and there are conditions that we have now in the license that allow us to more actively manage access to spectrum by being able to move people from one channel to another if need be. And we are developing at the moment an automated assignment process that uses a direct interface between devices and a spectrum management database that will allow us to do that kind of dynamic spectrum assignment allocation and modifications in near real time. When we look at spectrum sharing in the round, in my experience, there are 2 fundamental issues, and I think they've been touched on a little bit today when looking at sharing. Firstly, no one likes to share. Incumbents will always look to have as much protection as possible, and possibly even more than they really need. And there are few incentives for incumbents to share. there needs to be an efficient balance between protection given to one service and flexibility for others to transmit. And just very, very quickly, when I joined the Radio Comms Agency in 2002, there had been a recent consultation on spectrum sharing, and most of the responses were great idea, but not in my spectrum. That was the general tenor of those responses. I had a look at the responses to our 2020 consultation on our spectrum strategy, where we talk about spectrum sharing, and broadly, the responses are similar. The established incumbents are less enthusiastic about sharing than those looking to shake things up a bit. And the second issue with sharing is if a business relies on access to spectrum, the risk of losing access might undermine the business case for shared use. And we've had this discussion with TV white space users about the risk of losing access to spectrum when it's granted on an opportunistic basis. If you want spectrum to do your business and there's a risk that you could lose that, then that kind of undermines the business. So in sharing, particularly in dynamic sharing, spectrum assurance and security of tenure are important factors to support a business case. And hopefully new technologies and approaches to how spectrum is made available might help increase the potential for sharing and its adoption and kind of calm the nerves of those people who need to share. So we're really interested to see the outcome of ANACOM's work on licensed shared access, and thank you very much for the invitation.